Pretty much everyone knows that public transit is more efficient than private cars at moving large numbers of people, but we don't talk enough about just how big the difference is. This is the Don Valley Parkway, a 6-lane highway in Toronto. If you sit in one place at rush hour and watch the DVP, you could see 6,000 to maybe 8,000 people in those cars pass by in the busier direction over the course of an hour. If you do the same thing on the nearby Yonge subway, you could see 30,000 people per direction per hour, with ongoing signal upgrades pushing that up to 40,000 people in the future. That's an enormous advantage for the subway even before you consider that it only takes up 2 lanes, mostly underground. Subways don't carry freight, but when it comes to carrying lots of people, mass transit wins hands down, and it's not even close. We're going to come back to this capacity difference later in the video.
If you follow debates about building or expanding roads and highways, you've probably heard someone bring up the concept of induced demand, often linking explainer videos from places like Vox, where they use lots of colorful balls to explain, to argue against building the new road or highway. Induced demand, more accurately called induced traffic, is the idea that building new road space doesn't solve congestion, at least in the long term, because it encourages more driving to happen. When you build new lanes or roads, people who previously avoided driving at rush hour start becoming less careful about when and how much they drive. On top of that, other people and businesses see the new road capacity and move to the area to use it. As a result, congestion eventually ends up about as bad as before, and this is used as an argument against building the new road capacity.
Induced traffic is a very real phenomenon. It's not infinite. You could build a big highway in the middle of nowhere and it's not going to become congested in the near future, but there's a bunch of research finding that 50 to 100% of new road capacity in urban areas gets filled up after a few years. However, the induced traffic argument against new car infrastructure has always seemed, maybe not wrong, but certainly incomplete, because why does it only mention cars? What happens when we build another subway line, for example? Won't that just become packed in a couple of years too? And isn't that a problem? In this video, we're going to explain why induced traffic for walking, biking, and public transit is different than for cars, and why increased demand or usage for a mode doesn't have to mean slower travel for everyone.
Let's get back to transit in Toronto. In response to overcrowding on the Yonge subway, including at the major transfer station with the Bloor Dam 4th line, transit authorities are planning to build a new automated subway called the Ontario line to add capacity to the city's east end. When you think about it, the exact same points about induced traffic and highways could apply here, except that we probably call it induced ridership. In other words, this new subway line will cause more people to take more trips, both people who currently live there and new people moving to East End Toronto because of the new subway. Ridership will continue to grow, and eventually at some point in the future, the Ontario line will probably end up congested.
But if you told a transit planner that they shouldn't build the Ontario line because it will just induce more ridership and eventually become congested, they would probably look at you funny. Induced ridership is one of the goals of the Ontario line, which is meant to encourage growth in new transit-oriented communities. We want people to use the Ontario line, whether replacing car trips or taking trips that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. We prefer that it's not so much new ridership that the new line becomes overcrowded. That's bad for safety, efficiency, and user experience. But if and when that happens, it wouldn't mean the Ontario line was useless and shouldn't have been built in the first place. It would mean the Ontario line was really useful and we should probably build another subway line. If that's not possible, it's still better to have an overcrowded Ontario line than no Ontario line at all. The Yonge subway is overcrowded now, and no one thinks that means it shouldn't have been built.
If the basic principle of induced demand is the same, why does car infrastructure inducing more car traffic seem so threatening, while public transit infrastructure inducing more transit ridership feels benign or even good? One big reason is what we mentioned at the beginning of this video, the simple fact that public transit can carry a lot more people, so reaching capacity is less of an immediate concern. Imagine we're choosing between 2 transportation projects in Toronto's East End, the Ontario line with its planned top capacity of 34,000 passengers per hour per direction, or a 6-lane highway resembling the Don Valley Parkway with its 6,000 to 8,000 people per hour per direction. Both projects will induce more people to take more trips, both have the potential to hit capacity and become overcrowded, but one will reach capacity much faster than the other.
It's more than that though. It's not just that transit can handle high volumes, it's that transit usually gets better with more ridership. Most of the ways that a transit agency adds capacity to a route make service better for each individual rider, whether that's higher frequency, using trains over buses, giving signal priority on roads, or making the line tunneled or elevated. Transit riders don't want crowding, but they do have reason to want their routes to be well used. Driving works differently. You want enough other drivers to justify your road or highway existing, but aside from that, traffic is really only a threat that can slow you down or aggravate you. No one wishes for more drivers on their road to get more lanes, but you might wish for more ridership in your transit route so that you can get better frequency. If transit service gets better with more ridership, but the driving experience gets worse with more traffic, it makes sense that induced car traffic feels more threatening than induced transit ridership.
There's one more important difference between transit and driving when it comes to induced demand, which is pricing. One simple way to reduce congestion is to charge more money, discouraging people from making less important trips. For transit, this is straightforward. You increase the price of a fare or a pass, ideally offering a low-income subsidy if necessary. The driving equivalent to this would be a road toll or congestion charge, but at least in Canada we're not set up for that. Toll roads are rare and very unpopular. Increasing the gas tax might kind of work as a substitute. People can partially get around that by buying a more fuel-efficient car or stocking up on gas in a different jurisdiction. Thus, another reason that induced demand is less of a problem for public transit is that it has a simple form of congestion pricing built in.
We've focused on transit so far, but we fully expect induced demand to apply to walking or cycling infrastructure too. Imagine that your city has a mixed-use pathway that's overcrowded, and the local cycling advocacy group wants to double the width of the path so that pedestrians and cyclists have their own dedicated space. This probably will induce more people to walk and cycle, and like with transit, that doesn't sound so bad, whether people are replacing car trips or they're just being more mobile in general. Partly this is because more physical activity is a win for public health, and partly this is because trips taken by walking and cycling lack the negative externalities of cars. A bunch of people walking and cycling through your neighborhood just doesn't have the same noise, safety, and pollution side effects as the same number of people driving through your neighborhood. Infrastructure for walking and cycling is also relatively cheap and space efficient. No neighborhoods are being demolished to build bike lanes, but lots of neighborhoods were erased from existence to build highways in mid-century North America.
Based on these examples, the concept of induced demand on its own is not actually a slam dunk argument against expanding roads or building new highways. The problem with new car infrastructure isn't only that it'll induce more trips, because the same can be said for a new subway, bike route, or walking path, assuming they're built to conveniently connect people to places they need to go. Instead, the problem with new car infrastructure is related to the specific downsides of cars, from the negative externalities related to noise, safety, and pollution, to the basic geometric fact that they're an inefficient way to move a lot of people in a city, which makes them especially prone to congestion, even when we dedicate a lot of space to them.
Rather than thinking about induced demand as a special property of cars, we should think of induced demand as a basic fact that transportation demand and usage patterns aren't fixed. People make short-term choices about how to get around, and long-term choices about where to live based on the infrastructure available to them. If you build wider roads, people will drive more and they'll plan their lives around driving. If you build fast and convenient transit lines, people will take transit more and plan their lives around transit. If you build a safe and comfortable bike network that connects people to places they need to go, people will bike more, and so on. The question isn't really which types of transportation infrastructure induce demand, because they all do. The question is which type of demand do you want to induce?
Don't forget to induce bicycle infrastructure demand and subscribe.